Hey listeners, the next bonus episode from HIMSS 2025 is my interview with AJ Loiacono, CEO of Capital RX. They're a full-service pharmacy benefit manager and claim administrator solution. AJ shared a great story with me about a colleague who had 3 entities on the phone offering different prices for a medical procedure all at the same time, as an example of the unnecessary complexity in claim administration that his team is trying to solve. Let's get to it.
Let's cover some of the more recent news that Capital RX has coming out here. We're sitting here at HIMSS, but what are some of the more recent things that you've been celebrating with the company?
Yeah, I think the big celebration for us or announcement was at the start of the year, we moved into medical claim processing. So just quick history lesson. The United States has done everything what I call twice. If you have a prescription claim, it goes on its own administrative workflow. If you have a medical claim, it is on a different system with a different workflow, and this creates an enormous amount of administrative waste and frustration many times for the member experience. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is to build the first platform, and we call it unified claim processing. So instead of having 2 of everything, 2 eligibility workflows, 2 claim flows, 2 operational workflows, 2 billing, reimbursement, clinical, call center. Whenever you do something twice, you create twice the cost. And so for us, what we wanted to be able to do was streamline this to one system. And by doing this, we think there's over $1 trillion, yes, that's with a T, $1 trillion in administrative waste in the United States because we do everything twice. In addition, it creates natural friction points because information is not correct. Billing information is correct. Network information isn't updated. And this creates an enormous amount of friction for both plan costs, but more importantly, the poor member is lost. And I feel like this is something that has lasted for time eternal in the U.S. healthcare system, and no one has ever built one system to administrate both pharmacy and medical simultaneously on one system and remove all of this need for additional overhead. You have one team that can handle everything, and it creates a much better experience and reduces that administrative cost.
So let's dig into that a little bit, like how it improves and makes things easier. How does that trickle down or connect with the consumer who's ultimately, or the member, in this case,
Sure.
like who's participating?
Well, here's a great example is I was on the phone with someone I know in industry, and she recently had a baby, and she would like to say, and in her introduction to the story, she jokes, she's like, I would like to say I'm one of the foremost authorities in healthcare. She's like, I have a PhD from a top university in this field. I've worked in operational side in different companies, etc., in healthcare. But I'm on the phone with 3 different parties at once. I'm on the phone with what sounds like the network or clearinghouse. I'm on the phone with the carrier, and I'm on the phone with the provider, the doctor. And they all have 3 different prices for me. And she's joking, and she's just like, I am an educated adult in healthcare, and I am so confused why I'm being presented with 3 different prices. And she's like, is it let's make a deal? Am I supposed to pick one of these doors? And eventually, this conversation went on for 15 minutes, and she literally said, why don't the 3 of you get together and come back with a price between the high and the low? Give me what you're going to present. And what's fascinating in all of this is a lot of times this is because of this outdated administrative workflow where you have different vendors in each segment of claim administration instead of one singular system. And we talk about this, which is this concept of an enterprise system has a single source of truth. When every workflow is operating on the same system, it's never out of sync. But one of the biggest challenges in the U.S. healthcare system is the moment a claim file or a piece of information moves from system A to system B, it's already incorrect because eligibility changes, prices change, network changes, claims are coded, recoded, transferred. And so when the claim comes back or the information comes back from another system, I used to believe that there were systems or overrides or even human intervention that audited these things to make sure they matched. And the reality is as close enough as the rallying cry for the U.S. healthcare system. It's good enough. And if someone actually audits us or challenges a bill, then we'll get on the phone and go through it. And this is a great example of this administrative waste and friction because it's costing more money for the plan. It's a horrible experience for the member. And it's just adding to the bill of the U.S. health.
Yeah, it feels like innovation gets caught in the middle of all that, the administration itself. So realistically, there's a lot that just can't be done all in one fell swoop. It really is boiling the ocean. So, like, what areas can we make meaningful progress? Maybe that is unifying claims administration, or like what areas does it make sense for us to kind of double down on with innovation and say, like, this can make an oversized return for?
Well, I think it starts with exactly what we were talking about, which is let's remove the administrative burden and friction points by having a modern, efficient system that handles all these workflows. But the second part of it is now you can start focusing on the real care delivery. And again, one of the biggest problems with the U.S. healthcare system is we're treated as if we're all the same person. It's a one-size-fits-all healthcare event. And I often joke, my sister and I are genetically similar, but we have very different care needs. We respond to medication differently. We have different therapeutic regimens. And all of this information is lost. And what I mean by that is we're all treated as if we're one single entity instead of being what we call precision care, precision medicine. What is the best result to manage this patient? And in addition, how do we measure what is being what I call the outcome of healthcare? For some employer groups, I want to be fair, cost is a huge consideration for them, including the member. But another area is what we've overlooked is what is the definition of a better health outcome? Oftentimes, we're just focused on the cost or just trying to, what I call, push through the administrative workflow. And again, when you have a system, that links all of these areas in one platform, you can finally focus on things like value-based care and outcomes.
So where's Capital RX headed, or focusing, I guess, for like the short term, maybe like the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, next 6 months, I say this is the age of artificial intelligence. So one of the things that we're layering in quite successfully in lots of different areas is how do you continue to accelerate what I call low-value human tasks? And this is a great example of, let's just take a pharmacist who is looking at a prior authorization. And there's hundreds of fields of information in this form. The first line of defense should be what I would say some form of AI looking at not only the file to ascertain very quickly what is the essence of this prior authorization and should it be approved or rejected, and rejected on what merit, and if it requires more information, let's accelerate that process. Because instead of having a human being have to wade through this form, which could take a long time versus programmatically could go through it in seconds and begin to make recommendations based upon a structured rule set. It's not as if this is pure art. I feel like the edge cases where you want human intervention is, let's just say someone is using off-label use for therapy. And so it's a little unclear, what are the guidelines when that happens? Should I speak to another physician, to make sure that we understand this workflow appropriately? And I feel like this is a great example of, again, reducing cost, reducing friction, and who suffers the most in these, what I would call manual workflows, is the patient. They're waiting for information, they're waiting for their medication, they're waiting for a procedure, and all of this creates stress, and it also increased costs. Time is money, and this is a big part of it. So I think this is a great example of there's a lot of things coming together simultaneously in the industry. There's the promise of AI and the application to continue to reduce administrative costs. There's this awakening of the country where we want to have better care and we want to have it at an appropriate price point.
So if you're speaking to another colleague like the one you mentioned who had 3 different entities on the phone at the same time, somebody feels like they're getting caught up in any aspect of healthcare administrative burden themselves and they're struggling to navigate the system for their own care, what's your message for them?
Help is on the way. I wish that we worked with everyone. I wished everyone benefited from our services and solutions, but we're making great progress, and thankfully we have the opportunity to service millions of people, which is great. But I think the other part of it is don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to take ownership of your healthcare. Someone was asking me a question the other day, which is like, what happens to my patient records? And I go, unfortunately, if you move from employer A to employer B, you're basically losing access. to much of your patient records in a centralized location versus going to each provider or prescription area and pulling that together yourself. And so, my recommendation is take ownership, keep your data best you can, keep your patient record and information, but the future is bright, and there are solutions coming that are going to revolutionize and streamline everyone's experiences in healthcare.
Really appreciate you giving us some time, AJ. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me.